Okay, good evening. My name is Kenyada. I'm one of the Endocrinology ST6 registrar. I'll be your host today for the Society for Endocrinology National Endocrinology and Diabetes Taster Session webinar on why endocrinology, career insights, and top tips. Today, we have three excellent speakers covering a wide range of topics relevant to training in endocrinology and diabetes. So I hope everyone enjoyed today's webinar. Just a reminder that this webinar will be recorded and the recording will be available on the Society's website over the next few days. It will also be made publicly available on YouTube as well. Please could everyone kindly mute their mics and put the questions that they may have in their chat box, and we will go through the questions at the end of the webinar. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the first speaker, who will be talking about balancing motherhood and medicine, perspectives of a clinical academic, which will be covered by Dr. Isabel Huang Doran, who is an academic endocrinologist at the Wellcome MRC Institute of Metabolic Science, where she combines laboratory-based metabolic research with clinical practice in endocrinology and diabetes. Dr. Huang Doran completed both her medical training and PhD at the Crisis as part of the Cambridge MB PhD program. And during her PhD, she studied the novel genetic syndromes of severe insulin resistance, contributing to insights of our understanding of defective insulin action associated with obesity and type 2 diabetes. And currently, as an NIHR-funded academic clinical lecturer, her research now focuses on the close relationship between metabolic disease and reproductive health, in particular exploring the molecular mechanism by which obesity predisposes to endometrial cancer. So the floor is yours, Dr. Huang Doran. Thank you.
Thanks so much and welcome everyone to this seminar. I'm really delighted to have the opportunity to speak. So my name is Isabel and I'm going to start off by explaining kind of where I am in terms of my career and how I got here. And then I'm going to address the kind of two major topics or area of discussion that I was asked to talk about. So first of all, clinical academia, my experience as a clinical academic. And I thought what would be most useful was to talk about how people can get into research if that's what they're interested to. It's an issue, it's a question that I get asked quite a lot. And the second big area I've been asked to talk about is my experience of navigating motherhood or parenthood during my career as well. And I hope that will be relevant to many people, not just mothers, but fathers and indeed people with other care responsibilities at home. So what do I do? So first of all, I'm not a clinical lecturer anymore. I'm a Wellcome Clinical Research Career Development Fellow. What does that actually mean? That means that I'm essentially in a transition to independence phase of my research career. So hopefully by the end of my fellowship in a couple of years, I'll be in a position to make the transition to leading a research group. That takes up about 90% of my official job title. The other 10% is clinical work as an honorary consultant here in Cambridge at Addenbrooke's Hospital. And what that 10% actually looks like at the moment, and it's something that changes quite a bit, but essentially it's 2 clinics every month where I do general and reproductive endocrinology. So reproductive endocrinology is a particular area of interest of mine. And I do 2 fortnight blocks of ward cover covering our inpatient service, which is mostly general medicine with some D&E as well, and that includes out of hours cover. So that nominally is 80% full-time equivalent. So officially I only work 80% and I have 1 day off, if we can call it that, every week. In addition, I'm a fellow at Christ College, so one of the colleges of the University of Cambridge, and that involves teaching medical students. So I teach a course called Human Reproduction, which is a 2nd-year course that all of our students take, and it covers a lot of endocrinology as well as aspects of kind of obstetrics and maternal and fetal health. And that ends up taking kind of 3 or 4 hours every week, but only for around 4 or 5 months every year. I also sit on the interviews admission panel, so that's 1 week every year in December. And I take part in kind of open days and student events and so on to support our students. Now, realistically, most of all of that ends up happening in my own time, so either at weekends or in evenings when I do the supervisions. But it's something I kind of really enjoy and am very passionate about. So I end up fitting it in, and I do get paid separately for that. And then, of course, there's some roles that never stop. So I have a 2-and-a-bit-year-old daughter. I have a partner, and I am also I have parents who live locally and who increasingly need my support as well. I'm sure that will resonate with many people in the audience. So how did I actually get to where I am now? So I actually started off here in Cambridge almost 2 decades ago as an MB PhD student. So that's I caught the research bug early. I did an intercalated year, which everyone does, and then I decided I wanted to do a PhD whilst I was still doing my clinical training. So that was as part of the MB PhD program here in Cambridge, which is 9 years altogether, and you do a 3-year PhD after your 4th year, with realistically very little clinical work during those 3 years. I finished my PhD and I finished my medical school years, and I managed to get onto an academic foundation programme, as it was then called, in London, so in Northwest Thames, and that included, during the F2 year, 4 months of research, which I undertook at Imperial College at the IRDB, looking at ovarian biology. I'll come on to my actual research in a second. After that, I decided actually to move back to Cambridge for various reasons, both professional and personal. So I secured an academic clinical fellowship, which is a 3-year programme, and I worked with various people back in my home institute, the IMS, and what that looked like was essentially 3 months every year of protected research time over 3 years. So that was 9 months over 3 years. And that allowed me to explore some different research areas, different research techniques, and figure out what I wanted to then focus on for my clinical lectureship. And I managed to get that clinical lectureship straight away. So I segued straight from an ACF into the clinical lecture position, which was a 4-year position, 50% research, which I ended up taking 3 months of research, 3 months of clinical work. And during that time, actually right towards the end of my clinical lectureship, I took a year of parental leave when I had my daughter. And it's worth pointing out that I did the early years of my CL were over the COVID-19 pandemic, which obviously did impact on my research and the sorts of things I was able to do. And just before I went on maternity leave, or really in the run up to that, I applied for and was successful in securing my current position, which is the Career Development Fellowship. So essentially, I managed to come back from maternity leave, finish my CL, CCT, and then start my research fellowship the very next day. And that essentially is full-time research, although, as I said, there's some honorary consultant work as well, which just keeps my clinical skills going. So I was asked to just mention a little bit on my actual research. This clearly isn't the forum to go into that in detail, but just really I wanted to make the point that research careers, just like other careers, are not by any means linear, and I've done a range of different things, some of which are still very relevant to what I do today, some of which really aren't, but they've all been useful in shaping my kind of overall experience and my goals moving forward. So I started off during my PhD looking at syndromes of monogenic insulin resistance. What I actually should say is I started off really passionate about neuroscience. This was before I knew I wanted to become an endocrinologist, and my intercalated science here was in neuroelectrophysiology, which is absolutely nothing to do with what I do now, but it just goes to show that the interests can change and evolve. But when I was looking at, I'd been accepted onto the MB PhD program. Didn't really know what I wanted to do, but knew that I wanted to get a good broad training in a range of research techniques. And eventually I stumbled upon the IMS, and I became interested in some work that Robert Semple was doing, looking at syndromes of very severe insulin resistance caused by monogenic defects, gene defects, in either the insulin receptor or proximal downstream insulin signaling molecules, or else genes involved in the development of adipose tissue, which, if disturbed can lead to lipodystrophy. So I spent my 3 years during my PhD working up a number of novel syndromes of insulin resistance, in this case PIK3R1, which is one of the components of PI3 kinase, which features early on in the insulin signaling pathway, if anyone can remember their undergraduate biochemistry. And my role was essentially to try and understand these syndromes on a molecular and cellular level. What I wasn't doing at that point was any clinical evaluation of the patients, because I was still a medical student and therefore not really in a position to do that. So then I finished my PhD with some papers under my belt and a really good set of kind of very bread and butter molecular and cell biology skills, which was really, really useful. And then I decided I was quite interested in reproductive biology, and particularly in polycystic ovary syndrome, and how reproductive biology and metabolism interact. And so during my academic foundation program research, I went and worked, as I mentioned before, in Imperial, and I worked with Steve Franks to really learn kind of core skills and concepts in reproductive and particularly ovarian biology. So I spent some time, I spent the summer looking at mouse ovaries and counting follicles and measuring the size of follicles and so on and so forth, which was totally new for me, but actually a really valuable 4 months. So then when I came back to Cambridge, I was exploring, as I mentioned, different options. One of the projects I was looking at was looking at sex differences in liver fat. So using GCMS, which is a mass spec technology, looking at the amounts of different lipid species in male and female mouse livers and looking at differences and trying to tally those differences to differences in gene expression. The rationale being that we know that there are sex differences in the prevalence of certain metabolic liver diseases. So that was, again, a slightly different project for me. GCMS was totally new to me, so I got to learn some new skills. Around that time, I also started working with my PhD supervisor, again, Rob Semple, on a slightly more clinical aspect, looking at syndromes of monogenic insulin resistance, but particularly focusing on their reproductive phenotypes. And we showed that patients with severe insulin resistance often have a very, very severe form of a PCOS-like syndrome, including in the histology of their ovaries. So that was very nice because it brought together my earlier work with Rob and combined that with some of my newer experiences from Imperial. Around that time, I also, as part of my CL, started working with Sadaf Faruqi, and I got some experience in metabolomics. So they had treated some patients with congenital leptin deficiency. They treated these patients with leptin replacement, and we were able to look at the effect of that treatment on the metabolome of these patients. So looking at the combined metabolic profile in the blood and looking at the effects of acute leptin replacement. And around then, I'd also become interested in obesity and endometrial cancer, as was alluded to earlier, and was exploring whether that was something that we could model using human endometrial organoids. So growing endometrial cells derived from human biopsies, so patient biopsies, growing them in a dish, seeing them take on the endogenous architecture of the endometrium, and using that as a model for exploring the effects of hormone action, both in the context of metabolic health, but also in obesity. And all of that has somehow culminated on one of my major current bodies of work, which is to use single cell sequencing technologies, which is basically a genomic technology that allows us to look at gene expression in individual cells. And I'm looking at that over essentially all the tissues in the body. So trying to make new discoveries about how hormones are made, and particularly how they're acting in different cells and cell types around the body. So quite a range of different technologies and methodologies there that I've managed to gain experience of over the years. Some of which was published, some of which wasn't published. And I think that's an important point I wanted to make. But all of it kind of fits into my broad interest in how metabolism and reproduction interact with each other. So that's kind of my research background. So why am I interested, or why do I think it's really great to be a clinical academic? It allows you to tackle the big problems in medicine. It gives you an opportunity to really affect change. It's very creative, it's stimulating, it's rewarding. You can you can have the opportunity to develop a real expertise in a very specific area or methodology, and you get to work with some really great people. And crucially, you get to work with these people over a number of years, which is a little bit different, I think, in some ways to how clinical medicine operates these days, where you end up often working with also very great people, but for much shorter periods of time sometimes, which I don't find as rewarding. Research is very varied. You're always faced with new challenges. There's always another challenge to overcome. You're never quite stagnant in your role. And there's also lots of opportunities to learn new skills. And crucially, and this is very relevant to the next bit of my talk, it's very, very flexible. And there is a much higher, I think, degree of self-determination than in pure clinical work, which for me at this stage in my career has been very, very valuable. Yes, it requires a lot of hard work, a lot of perseverance. You've got to get very comfortable with failure and be ready to try again. And it is fair to say that sometimes it feels like there isn't as much job security, and certainly currently the funding landscape for clinician scientists is more challenging, I think, than it was before. I'm just going to very quickly skip over this slide, but essentially this is the NIHI integrated academic training pathway that shows the academic foundation program, as it was then called, academic clinical fellowships. At this point, people would often try and get a PhD and then siphon into a clinical lectureship with independent fellowships after that. But actually, a lot of people don't follow that pathway. And I just wanted to address this point of how we can try and, or how people can get into research perhaps a little bit later in their clinical careers. I think it's important to consider a few initial questions. So first of all, you've got to identify what really excites you. What gets you out of bed in the morning? Is there a big question or a clinical problem that you feel you want to tackle? And often this will come from your clinical experience. It'll be a problem you face in the clinic or a particular patient or something. It's worth thinking about what sort of research you're interested in doing, whether it's wet lab, whether it's clinical research involving patients or volunteers, whether it's more computational or in silico work. And what are your long-term goals? Do you just want to get some experience of research, so you might continue to do a little bit throughout your career? Do you want to do a PhD? Do you want to be a clinician scientist in the future? One of the main barriers, I think, is funding. Lots of people are very enthusiastic. Lots of people want to involve trainees in their research, but actually it's the funding that often stops people, in my experience. And it's important to recognise that whilst there are a number of funded PhD programmes that allow clinicians in training to do research, they are competitive and they require you to have done some research already. So there is this issue of how one gets into it in the first place. Academic clinical fellowships are clearly helpful, but they are competitive. They often, are slightly biased towards people who have already done the intercalated degrees, who've done the PhDs and therefore have the papers. There are a number of centres that will offer pre-doctoral fellowships that give you a year in which to kind of generate some research, get into some research and generate some data that will allow you to apply for a PhD if that's what you want. Lots of people, and I really admire these people, they do research in their own time after work or at weekends or during their holidays, and that's great, but not something that necessarily everyone is able to do, perhaps because of other commitments, childcare and so on. Some people even do a master's degree, which is great if you've got the funding for it, but they are expensive. They're certainly one way of getting research experience and papers and things under your belt. And one that I guess I wanted to draw attention to is that there are these kind of clinical research fellow appointments. So research studies often need clinicians, including clinicians in training, to join them for a year to help do aspects of their work. And that's quite a nice option. It's just that they're a little bit harder to find. But that kind of takes me to probably my most important point, which is that if research is something you're interested in or you want to explore, then the key thing is to speak to people, speak to mentors, speak to the consultants you work for, speak to clinician scientists in your hospital, and speak to senior colleagues as well, i.e. registrars or whatever, because they will be able to guide you they might know about local opportunities. They might be able to suggest who next to speak to. And really, I always say that, you know, the more people you speak to, the more potential opportunities will be put in front of you. Go to local research seminars, expose yourself to lots of research, see what excites you and what you might like to get involved in. And the crucial point that is if you're enthusiastic and smart, there will be a space for you in research. We're really, really keen to attract talented young clinicians into research in endocrinology. That's absolutely critical for our specialty. And it's something, as you can see, I'm very passionate about. Moving on, and I'm conscious I'm already out of time, but I'll just finish these slides if I may. So my experience of motherhood, I should say I'm much less experienced at this than many people. My daughter's 2 years old, so I only have 2 years worth of experience of this compared to significantly longer experience of academia. I was basically non-patient facing for the final few months of my pregnancy. So my supervisors were very, very supportive. That was both clinical and research supervisors. I then took a full year out, which ended up being a little bit more than a year. I then had to go straight back into 2 weeks of acute general medicine, which caused a great deal of anxiety at the time, as you can probably imagine, but actually was fine because I'd essentially already effectively CCT'd. I'd met all my requirements, but I had to do these 2 extra weeks because I had a 12-month break. And so what I got to do was actually just act up on the AMU and get my skills back that way. And that was fantastic for me. It really boosted my confidence. It was a very supportive environment. And I got to do some fantastic general medicine. So in the end, that worked out really well. I had only 2 months left of my training before I CCT'd. Most of that was research, other than those 2 weeks of gyn, and then I went straight into my fellowship. I was really anxious about a long break. You know, my research projects were basically put on hold. I was worried about losing clinical skills. I was worried about how I would cope with sleep deprivation and having less bandwidth to do even more work. Obviously, one of the challenges that many of you will recognise is to do with childcare and unexpected 6 days, which happened even more than I was led to expect. And I realised that I had actually spent a lot of my career relying on kind of catching up in the evenings and catching up at weekends, which just wasn't possible, isn't possible to the same extent anymore. So that's kind of put new pressures on my life. However, it's been fine. I am very, very lucky in many ways, and I'm mindful that there will be people in the audience who aren't as lucky in some regards as me. But you know, an academic career is very flexible, and there is more scope for remote working, which has been enormously helpful over the past year since I came back to work. I have family nearby, which is, again, I'm very, very grateful for that support I get. My daughter goes to nursery almost full time. My supervisor and colleagues in the team are absolutely fantastic. But also I've had to, you know, develop my own skills. I've had to be a bit better at time management. I've had to learn to prioritize some things, and I have had to learn to say no. And it's not necessarily no, I won't do whatever forever. It's no, now isn't the right time, but maybe come back to me in a few months or a few years even. I just wanted to flag up that there is lots of support from deaneries, I should say trust and deanery support, obviously, for trainees who take time out. And I actually ended up not using many of these because I didn't particularly feel that I needed them or they were for me. But I know they're very, very good. Every deanery should have a support champion, and there are all sorts of kind of keep in touch days, enhanced supervision arrangements, and so on that can support trainees who have had a break for parenthood or indeed any other reason. And this I've just put up as this is stuff that's on the East of England deanery, actually, not that I'm particularly promoting the East of England, although it is great. But there are just some thought-provoking kind of suggestions about realistically appraising your expectations for that time off, not being over-ambitious, being comfortable with saying, actually, I'm going to spend a year looking after my baby and I'm going to really enjoy that and not worry too much about other things. So on that note, I'm just going to finish and say, yes, parenthood is challenging. Academia is challenging. The two together are perhaps not as challenging as you might think, and definitely both very rewarding and very much worth the effort. I do think it's always helpful in life, obviously, to plan ahead, anticipate what things might be difficult, and find out early what support there might be. But there is really no such time as an ideal time to have a family. I think that's important to say. I was lucky in that I started my family at a time when I wasn't doing nights, and lots of difficult on calls. I appreciate that may not be for everyone, but usually people do manage to cope with these challenges. And I think most importantly, it's worth saying that careers are really, really long, and it's important to recognize that there will be difficult phases, such as when you have small children, and then there will be easier phases, and every difficult phase will pass. I'm going to end there. Apologies for going over my allocated time as the first speaker. So hopefully we'll be able to catch up soon. Thanks so much, everyone.
No, absolutely. That was amazing, Dr. Hundaran. That was very insightful and very applicable to most of us trainees who'd balance clinical and academic research, and highlights potential pathway for all the potential trainees who's interested in both clinical and academic medicine. So thank you so much for that lovely talk. We'll move on to the next speaker. So our next speaker is Dr. Piyumi Wijewikrama, who will be talking about exploring the Certificate of Eligibility for Specialist Training, or CESA pathway. So Dr. Wijewikrama graduated from the University of Colombo in Sri Lanka back in 2012. She then completed her postgraduate training and subspecialty training in diabetes and endocrinology in 2018 at the National Hospital of Sri Lanka, which is home to the country's largest diabetes and endocrine center. In September 2020, as part of her specialty training, she then moved to the UK and worked as a senior clinical fellow in diabetes and endocrinology at Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital, and then completed her CESA training in University College London Hospital NHS Trust. Currently, with the experience that she gained both from Sri Lanka and in the UK, she completed her CESA pathway and is currently a consultant in diabetes and endocrinology at Epsom and St Helier University Hospital NHS Trust, where she leads the inpatient diabetes services and combines teaching, quality improvement, and clinical medicine, endocrinology, and diabetes. So we are very lucky to have Dr. Wijewikrama with us today. So the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kanara. I hope you can see my slides. I'm very grateful for the Society for Endocrinology for giving me the opportunity to talk about the CESA pathway with all of you. I'll start with a little bit about my background, which of course Kanara already told a lot about, and then I'll explain what is the CESA pathway, who's eligible, and how to decide whether this is for you. I'll take you quickly through the necessary things for the CESA application, and I'll give you some insight as to what my experience was when I was doing this. So I'm coming from Sri Lanka. I graduated in 2012 from the University of Colombo and completed my postgraduate training in GIM and diabetes and endocrinology in Sri Lanka, as well as a MD in medicine. So for us to become a consultant in Sri Lanka, it is mandatory to have an overseas training for 1 to 2 years. This is why I first moved to the UK in 2020 September as a senior clinical fellow in diabetes and endocrinology at Guy's and St Thomas's through the MTI pathway. And then later on, after a few months, I decided that I will stay in the UK, and then I moved to UCLH as sort of a more trust grade position, so that it will be easier for my other plans. So when I made this move, I had two goals really, to complete the requirements for the diabetes and endocrinology board certification as a consultant in Sri Lanka, which I did in 2023 February, and also to gain specialist registration in the UK through the CESA pathway. I submitted my application for the CSER in last year, July. And right after that, I moved as a locum consultant in diabetes and endocrinology at Epsom and St. Helier, where I am currently working. I got my CSER application approved and gained specialist registration in this year, May. And just last week, I had an interview for a substantive consultant post at Royal Sussex County Hospital at Brighton, which is local to where I live. And I'll be moving there shortly, hopefully to spend the next several years in my career. So right now, as a new consultant in a DGH, it had been really a steep learning curve for me for the last 1 year. I am leading the inpatient diabetes service as well as the young adult service. I'm doing a lot of type 1 diabetes, insulin pumps, clinics, general endocrinology, and I cover GIM as well as the acute medical tech. In the last year, I did several projects to improve the inpatient diabetes service in the trust, as well as to streamline the perioperative diabetes pathways. Other than leading teaching sessions mainly around inpatient diabetes care, I'm also an appraiser for the trust currently. Now, I'll come to our topic of the session about really what is this CSER pathway. So if you want to become a substantive consultant in the UK, and of course, if you are a UK graduate or if you have migrated from another country at an early stage in your career, getting into the training and doing CCT is more sort of a more straightforward, smooth way. However, if you are like me, if you've moved to this country at a later stage in your career, or if you have completed the specialist training already from another country, or even if you were on a non-training sort of a trust grade job in the same specialty for several years and now want to become a consultant in the UK, then CSER or the portfolio pathway may be for you. Either way, you can gain entry into the GMC Specialist Registry. So what is CSER? This is the Certificate of Eligibility for Specialist Registration. As I said, it's an alternative route to obtain specialist registration in the UK for those of you who have not followed the CCT program. When I submitted my application in the middle of last year, it was called the CSER or the equivalent pathway. Basically, I had to give the evidence to demonstrate that I am equivalent to a CCT trainee. And now it had been replaced by the portfolio pathway since the end of 2023. It is still more or less the same process, but now I feel that you have a little bit more flexibility around the evidence that you can provide, and there is a clearer guidance from the GMC as to what kind of evidence are required. According to the GMC guidance, if you are eligible to do the CSER, if you have either a specialist qualification from another country or if you have completed at least 6 months of continuous training, you should hold GMC registration, obviously, and you should be able to provide evidence to demonstrate how you are eligible to meet all the requirements in the endocrinology CCT curriculum. So how are you going to decide? Really, it depends on your individual circumstances, whether you want to get into the training at an early stage or whether you want to take a break from the clinicals and get into research, or whether you want to stay as a trust grade doctor for several years just because it will give you some flexibility. So all that is dependent on your wishes and your individual circumstances. However, if you have decided that you want to become a consultant, obviously you will decide which specialty you want to do. And then if you, like me, if you have already worked a longer duration of time in that particular specialty, either in the UK or elsewhere, then it's really, you have to really think about what you have already done, compare that with the requirements in the CCT curriculum, and identify the gaps in your existing evidence and experience, and think about how long it will take for you to address these gaps. Now, if you say that although you have worked in endocrinology for this many years of time, but you still have a lot of gaps to be filled to gain the specialist registration, then it is best to opt for CCT. However, there are only minor gaps which can really be filled by working in the NHS for around 1 to 3 years. I think you can still, the CSER is a good option for you in that situation. This is how I decided on this. If you want to know more about this, you should go to the GMC website and start reading the Portfolio Pathway Application Guide. It gives a nice step-by-step guidance, and there is also the specific guidance, which exactly tells you what is required. You, of course, should have an idea about the diabetes and endocrinology CCT curriculum so that you will know what are the things to be expected. Even if it is for the CSER or the CCT, both ways they look at the candidates achieving these high-level learning outcomes, which are known as capabilities in practice or CIPs. The generic CIPs really look at your ability to independently work in the NHS, your communication skills, teaching skills, your research backgrounds, leadership and management quality improvement background. Clinical CIPs focus on the GIM part of your training, and the specialty specific CIPs focus on the diabetes and endocrinology part of your training. So you have to, if you are pursuing the CSER, you have to give evidence to demonstrate that you have fulfilled all these capabilities in practice. You can give any amount of your evidence, but the biggest weight is given for the evidence within the last 5 years. And all this has to be submitted electronically through the GMC online website. And all the patient sensitive data has to be anonymized. All the evidence that you provide has to be verified by the identified verifiers in each of your workplaces. If you have any qualifications from overseas, they have to be authenticated from a notary public or a lawyer. Usually the triangulated evidence, that means if you give like evidence for the same evidence given in 3 different ways, will make a stronger application. For example, if you want to demonstrate how you have done teaching, you will be giving your teaching agendas and example slides. Along with that, if you also give some student feedbacks and some teaching observation assessments that you have done with your supervisors, that will really make that component stronger. Ultimately, all these things will come to around 100 electronically uploaded documents, which will be roughly around 1,000 pages for your whole application. You should also identify 4 referees to give you structured reports to support your application. Now, I'll quickly take you through what kind of evidence are expected. First of all, you need to give evidence about your training, qualifications, and employment. You start by doing your CV. Now, this CV is very detailed, and it has to really be a reflection of your whole application. And then you will submit any qualifications that you have. While it's not mandatory to do the MRCP if you have a equivalent qualification from another country, doing MRCP and also completing the specialty certificate really makes the whole process very smooth, and it's best if you do that. And then you have to give all the information about the posts that you have held and also about your annual appraisals. In the portfolio pathway, there is specific guidance on the amount and the types of assessments that are required for both GIM and diabetes and endocrine, as I have listed here. You have to also give the patient feedbacks and the MSFs. Now, you can do this by maintaining your EPO, just so that you will have all the assessments in one place. But you don't require the ARCPs, obviously, because you are not in the training. You can just do the assessment at your own pace for the CSER. And then you have to also give evidence of you seeing patients. One way to do this is to submit patient lists, that is like anonymized list of day-to-day cases of the patients that you see as outpatient and inpatients. I used to do this then and there every sort of almost daily. Whenever I approve my clinic letters, I used to note these things down, and ultimately I could just submit that document. And then you'll be giving some clinic letter examples of your clinic letters, referral letters, training courses that are relevant to your curriculum, multiple consultant reports. You need to also give evidence about the researches that you have done, any publications, presentations, audits, QIPs, all the leadership experiences and qualifications. Similarly, for teaching also, you have to give evidence for the separate teaching sessions that you have done, the feedbacks, and the assessments. For CPDs, it's easy if you have a CPD diary with required reflections. You can do that within your e-portfolio or maintain a separate RCP CPD diary. For the portfolio pathway, it is also mandatory to give all the evidence for GIM, including sign-off of the relevant procedures and updated ALS. Yeah, so it does sound like a lot, but it's not impossible if you have if you're really working towards achieving this goal. So how did I do it? Of course, as I told you, I decided within a few months that I'm going to do this, and I then started collecting the evidence right away. I gathered all the things from my Sri Lankan training together as well. I maintain the e-portfolio just because I could keep all the assessments in place, and I remember to get everything done in time. And CPDs, completing the courses, I did that in a very focused way, actually. Teaching was something that I've been doing at all stages of my career. So I just had everything that I've done so far when it came to the CSER application. The only extra things that I had to do was getting some feedbacks from my students. I did that from my medical students, and also a teaching observation from my supervisor. Well, I think as a full-time clinician, as full-time clinicians, I've seen that a lot of people struggle with balancing research and publications. It's not that easy. I worked as a research assistant at the first step of my career back in 2013 at University of Colombo. So that sort of a background was there. And then what I did at the early stages of my training was I started writing case reports in my interested areas. Just it's a good way to really get the hang of writing articles. And then I did researchers, clinical focus researchers, and review articles both in the UK and also in Sri Lanka. These are just a few examples. So having some publications in some high impact journals, I think, would have helped my application. Similarly, when it comes to QIPs and sort of leadership management experiences, these are the things that I've been doing at all the places that I worked, and also with my training in Sri Lanka. And when I was working in the UK, I was in guideline committees both for Sri Lanka and in the UK, and then I did audits and had publications around those audits. And I've done several QIPs at different stages of my career, and the presentations at different forums. Again, these things, although I wasn't thinking about the CSER when I was doing most of these things, finally all of them really paid off when I did my application. So my top tips for you will be really, if you want to pursue this, first of all, you have to really decide whether this is for you. If you decide that you are going to do it, it's best to stick to that decision and start collecting evidence from the beginning. When you start collecting evidence, again, you might understand that, no, this is not that doable, it's not that possible. Then in that case, again, you can, of course, think about your decision. Even if you have experience from another country like me, still working in the NHS for around, at least for up to around 3 years, at least actually up to around 1 year even, before submitting the application, will help to strengthen your application. As you saw, I worked here from 2020 to 2023 before I submitted my application. Although I was already a consultant in Sri Lanka, I took that time so that my application will be strong, and also that I would gain more confidence in working as a consultant in the NHS. It's important that you manage your time wisely, because this is not the only thing that you do. You will be balancing this with your clinical work and also your family life. So usually, it's good if you can spend around 4 hours per week for your portfolio. It really pays off in the end. I was lucky to really have my husband and 2 close friends doing the CSER at the same time. So it sort of made the whole process very efficient. And then having good mentors and seniors is very extremely important, not only to guide you throughout your career and throughout this whole application process, but also to support your application. The most important thing that I want to highlight is that if you have been passionate about what you do, if you really like diabetes and endocrine, all the work that you have done would finally become the evidence for your competencies. So if you're passionate about what you do, all this evidence will naturally follow. So on that note, and with these 2 photos from Sri Lanka, which I took recently, I would like to come to an end, and I'm happy to take any questions at the end of the session. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Dr. Vijay Vikrama. So that's very practical and personal, sharing your experience about the CSA pathway, which I think we all found very useful. And thank you for sharing the beautiful photos from Sri Lanka at the end. So as Dr. Vijay Vikrama alluded to, please can everyone put in their questions that they may have, which all the panels will then address at the end of the webinar. Okay. So moving on to the last speaker, we have Professor Miles Levy, who will talk about, following on from the last talk about, I'm a consultant, now what? Okay, so Professor Levy is a consultant endocrinologist at the University Hospitals of Leicester since 2005, and he is also an honorary professor at Leicester University. He has an active research background and does a lot of research in the genetics of endocrine tumors, functional imaging in endocrine tumors, and pituitary tumors and headaches. He's also the CRG lead endocrinology for Midlands and East and training program director for diabetes and endocrinology East Midlands South. So we're really lucky to have Professor Levy with us today. So the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can you see the slides and hear me? Right. Well, thanks everyone. Good evening. And this is my disclaimer. I've got no special skills in this area, so it's nice to be asked by Heather, but I can't tell you I'll change the world for you. But I can share you my own experience, and please feel free to ignore this whole talk. But I'm going to just give you some tips that have seen me through. I'm now 53, so I've been a consultant since 2005. I love it. I absolutely love it. These are what sustains me in a career in consultant medicine, because you have a lot of, the last two talks have shown you've got lots of goals to get through, but then you achieve your goal and you're in the Gobi Desert, because that's it, you're a consultant. What now? So you need to sustain yourself. So in order to do that, you have to wake up every day doing what you enjoy, not what other people think sounds cool. Do what you think sounds cool. Okay, so I think if your job is your hobby, for me, endocrinology is like a hobby. I think it's fantastic, an amazing specialty. It's like a fine wine. It gets better every year. So I think if your job is your hobby, you've basically won. No one can grind you down. I would strongly advise you not to listen to your mum and dad and your loved ones. Listen to yourself. Listen to your internal voice. If something seems right, then, have a think about why it does or doesn't, but certainly listen to yourself, because there's lots of group think. You just really have a sense of self, because people pick up on authentic enthusiasm. Patients and colleagues, if you're going to work and you really enjoy your subject, people will pick up on it, and that will sustain you. If ever you watch any reality TV program, the people that win are always the authentic ones that are not putting it on. So my second point is that flesh and blood, in other words, people, are far more important than the bricks and the mortar. So don't get seduced by the glamour of a building, okay? Because what gives you a good or a bad day, and I've had an annoying afternoon this afternoon trying to get a new consultant, and I'll tell you about that. But people are the things that give you a good or a bad day. If you've got good colleagues, and I have amazing colleagues, you're going to have a good day every day. And life doesn't always go well at work or at home. So if you've got a good relationship at home, sounds obvious, and a good day in the office with your colleagues, it's the people that are going to really make a difference. So always look out, particularly if you're applying for a consultant job, who you're going to be working with. It will make a massive difference, because you'll see them as much, probably more than your spouse. So try not to be seduced by the glamour of a building, but look at the people, because that is by far going to sustain you more than anything else. My third tip is to be a good consultant, is to be a brilliant team player. It's what the most important thing in medicine, in whether you're going to be a GP or a hospital doctor or an endocrinologist. You have to work in teams, and you have to know your place within a team that will change depending on the stage of career you're at. And that's the same whether you're a junior doctor or a junior consultant, middle grade consultant. Okay, there's a complete difference between someone who's been a consultant for 30 years and somebody who's on their first day of a consultant. Okay. You're going to be a good doctor if you have compassion for your patients and your colleagues. Whatever you do, you're going to be good, okay? And being unselfish and being civil is infectious and contagious. And believe me, the opposite can be the case as well. So if you're somebody that takes one for the team and does a little bit of extra work because it's going to save someone else a job that seems a bit sort of unattractive, people will do the same to you. Okay. Try and use we rather than I. Okay, so that'll help you both in the good and the bad times. So in clinic, we've organized these tests. We've made this diagnosis, not I. Okay, in the same way, if something goes wrong, we've discussed this with our team. Okay, work within the team. Nobody works as an island, and the ones that do end up getting a little caught out because it will help you both when things are going well as well as things are going badly. If things are going well and you've had some award, it should be reflected on all of your colleagues, not just you. Okay. I would strongly advise you to be a good generalist as well as a good specialist. Now, it may seem very attractive to give up lots of stuff that you don't like, but you're going to be the last one to turn the lights up if you're good at everything. And when patients come and see you in clinic, and I mainly do endocrinology now, but if someone comes in with a clinical problem that's not endocrinology, I don't switch off. I just change my hat to general medicine because patients want to know what they do have, not what they don't have. And you will be all things to all people if you're good at everything, but also really good at something, whatever that is. When you start as a consultant, just show you can do the job. Just show that you're a good clinician and you can do the basics. Earn the respect of your colleagues. If someone refers you a difficult case, take it on. Okay? There's always someone to ask for help. If you want respect, take on the difficult cases, but also share it with the team. And then gradually over time, you will develop an interest organically in something. That just happens. Okay. Be careful what you wish for is my next point. It's quite difficult to give up a clinical service once you start as a consultant, and there'll be lots of people that want to hand you things maybe that they've always wanted to give up. So be aware of that and don't say yes immediately to clinical things unless it's something you really want to do. So my advice to junior consultants is fill your week up doing things you like, because you may have things you want to develop over time. So just don't say no, don't say yes. Say thank you, that sounds really interesting. Can I just think about it because I just want to get my feet under the table? That's what I did. Take your time. You've got your whole life, your whole career. Don't try and change everything overnight. People are very wary of the new kid on the block that tries to change everything within a week. Okay, just stay there for a year or two, show you can do the job, and then start to build up. Okay. On the other hand, when you start, always say yes to non-clinical things that are not saddling you with a clinical service. So if someone asks you to give a talk, say yes. If someone asks you to do some teaching, say yes. If someone asks you to join a committee that you think is interesting, say yes. You can give it up, but it opens up a whole host of opportunities. I certainly did that, and I'm very grateful for it because you can show off your interests and your enthusiasm, gives you a chance to extol the virtues of whatever you think is cool in your career, and make a genuine contribution, both locally to your department and the region. Then later on, you'll be able to get involved with things outside the trust. And I liken things regionally and nationally a bit like if you're living in a village, people tend to get annoyed and worried by really small things. You want to be a cosmopolitan person where you're like a global member of a global village. And that happens if you get perspective, if you do things outside your small world of the trust. The next tip is to show grace under pressure and adversity. Okay, you can learn a lot more about someone when things are going badly than when things are going well. I promise you, when you become a consultant, you'll get complaints, and I promise you, you will take it personally. I did. My senior colleague told me that. When you get an email from the coroner, you think you're about to go to prison. Okay, it's horrible. But be cool, because just go through the process. You've got lots of support. Litigation's unpleasant, but it happens. It's now when I get a complaint or any problem, I see it as a really good way of showing good leadership and looking after other people, because people get stressed, and it's your chance as a doctor, as a medic, as a consultant. You know, sometimes consultants have demasculinized themselves or disempowered themselves, defeminized themselves, whatever, by thinking they don't run the hospital. But I can promise you that when the SH1T hits the fan, it'll be you as the consultant that will be sorting the problem out. Okay, so do it with grace and never blame other people. Never blame other people. Okay, when things go wrong, it's always multifaceted. Things will go wrong. If there are genuine issues that somebody's done something that you think is not right, deal with it personally, speak to them. Try not to send emails that are emotive. I'm not very good at that, but I'm trying. Okay. If you're going to say something electronically, make it positive. Just say positive things. Fine to send an email saying, well done, that was great. But if you're going to say something negative, do it in person, okay? Because it depends what the mood of the person that's receiving the email is. If you can do anything negative, do it face to face, okay? Try and have a good sense of who you are as a person. That sounds a little bit sort of, I don't know, hippie-ish, but I think it's really important because everyone's got different personalities and you have to fit within a team. And you have to sort of have a bit of self-awareness, and some people don't and run into problems. And, you know, I kind of, I'm beginning to understand the shadow I cast on people. And I think it's important to have some humility and not take yourself too seriously, because we're all in it together. We're all human beings. And I mean that in clinic as well. Patients really respond to somebody, a doctor that realizes that we're all just fully paid up members of the human race. There's nothing particularly clever about us apart from the fact that we've gone to medical school and passed exams and are trying to help. So I think humor's a great defense mechanism. Be aware of generational differences. It works both ways. Just as I have had to learn how to, you know, appreciate, my children are the same age as the medical students, so I'm aware of sensitivities when you're, you know, sometimes intentions can give rise to offence when it's difficult. There are landmines everywhere, right? But I would encourage you people to also respect the generations above, because there are some people that are, we look after people from cradle to grave. There are some elderly people that won't understand the things that you worry about, and it's important to have respect the fact that it goes both ways if people aren't understanding each other. You know, the millennials are very different from Gen Z, and it's brilliant that we can all get on, but it's important to understand this, especially as a doctor. If you are upset, be careful who you upset along the way, because you never know when you might meet them again. Okay, so try and deal with things properly. Find a mentor. It's very important to talk to someone outside your department who you can talk to. I've certainly used mentors all the way, and I have role models of people who I want to be like and people who I definitely don't want to be like. The more you put into work, the more you'll get out of it. That's the same as life generally. It sounds obvious, but it's true. If you're having a busy day doing things you don't like, try and do something you do like, even if it means you get back a bit later. I'm aware of the previous talks about trying to manage time. But I personally hope that, you know, when I retire, which, you know, I want to leave the crowd wanting more. I've got other things I want to do apart from medicine, but I think medicine's a great career. It's a real privilege. We don't know how lucky we are. You can make a huge contribution. The only thing that's stopping you from developing yourself is yourself. No one's going to stop you doing anything. I've really enjoyed doing other things. Another tip is physician heal thyself. Don't give up your hobbies. I play music in a band. We've had you know, an album out, which is, I think, my best publication. Forget all the scientific publications. We were in R&R magazine this month, next to Van Morrison, and I think patients pick up on the fact that I do other things, and I think it makes you a more interesting doctor. Patients like to know you're a human being. I don't really want to give you my CV because it's boring, but just in case it gives you some ideas, when I first started as a consultant, I organised the new consultant meetings. We went for tapas. I organised how to deal with complaints and inquests because I wanted to learn myself. Then I wanted to get into education as a Royal College tutor. Then I do loads with medical school. I love the teaching aspect. Started some regional meetings, pituitary, adrenal, obstetric. And then after a few years, looked after the registrars as a training program director, was asked to be on the clinical committee and applied. And that's been a really great chance to do lots of nice work looking after initiatives for endocrinology around the country. I was the editor of the Endocrinologists. With Heather, I've worked with public engagement. Heather's brilliant. The Society for Endocrinology is small but beautifully formed. And I sort of helped, was the editor-in-chief of You and Your Hormones. So we put videos and social media things on. I try and publish a few papers a year. I write the chapter of Kumar and Clark. I referee lots of papers, and recently I was given an honorary professorship because we got £500,000 grant, because as a medic you're in a really unique position. We are brilliant to work with scientists because we have patients with tumours, and patients always say yes to research. So this £500,000 donation we got was from a very rich benefactor who we looked after. We can get huge amount of goodwill by working with patients, and now I'm really pleased to be working in circulating DNA. I love working with the patients. We've changed the name of condition, which is amazing. And the main thing we've done there is not try and own the idea. I've made all these famous professors think it's their idea. I go to Uzbekistan once a year to help set up pituitary services, and I'm involved in the mainstream testing and genetics. So these things just sort of happen. And then signs that you're really old, which I am, like I'm 53, you get asked to do things that sound quite proper, like I'm the, what's it called? I can't remember what it's called, the president-elect of the Royal Society of Medicine, and also on the Council of Society for Endocrinology. So we'll be interviewing the chief executive of the Society for Endocrinology on Thursday morning. Trustee for the Pituitary Foundation, I've been asked to doing policies. But these things are, and also recently asked to be a member of the International Society of Endocrinology, which is great because I want to try and go to developing countries. My kids have now gone to university, so I've got time to travel. I mean, endocrinology is fantastic. I don't really want to. I was going to, because we're a bit behind time, but endocrinology is the most colourful, fantastic specialty. This is our trip to Uzbekistan. This is us in the British Embassy. Honestly, the colleagues I have, I love with a passion. This is Narendra. Every day we laugh. These are the nurses. Regini in the red dress has moved to India to look after her folks. She was crying when she left. She's a consultant colleague. We'd have her back in a heartbeat. She's coming to do clinics with us soon because her dad's died and she wants to keep her membership up. This is me being stupid at my secretary's children's wedding. This is us at my joint 50th. This is me with the patients. The people behind the two people behind were the relative sister and mum of a guy that died on his 22nd birthday, and the lady on the left is a patient with diabetes insipidus. On the right is a patient whose brother Charlie died, and we're introducing smart catheters. The lady in the middle is actually Amy Winehouse's mum, who's helping us with this initiative. So just to summarise, cast your own unique shadow. And a friend of mine died of cancer. She was a beautiful girl. We went to the funeral, and on the back of the funeral was something that really moved me, and this is something that I think is true for everyone. It's by Maya Angelou, which is, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people never will forget how you made them feel. And when you've finished and when you've retired, people will just have a certain feeling about you, and you just want to work out in your own mind what sort of feeling you want people to have about you. And with that, I will say, just enjoy your career.
Thank you so much, Professor Levy. That was excellent, and sharing your personal touch of endocrinology and how endocrinology kept you going is really amazing and really inspirational. So now if we can move on to the questions at the end of the webinar, and if I can invite all three speakers to please turn on their camera and unmute their mics for any questions that might be coming in. Thank you. I can't see anything coming in at the moment, so I invite people to send in their questions. So if I may start with a first question, if I may. Mentorship. I think all three of you touched on mentorship and having a good role model. What is the importance of having such a good mentorship, and how do you find a good mentorship that is good for you at the right stage of your career? Open up to the floor.
I mean, I just want to say that Dr. Huang Doran is asking what we think of the associate PI scheme, so we must deal with that. In terms of mentorship, for me, it has to be organic. So I think the problem at the moment is you get assigned a clinical and an educational supervisor electronically. It's a bit like speed dating where no one's looked at your profile or something. So I think it needs to be somebody that you just gravitate towards when you've been working. I think it's someone you have to have worked with, that you get along with, who you generally want to be like. And I would assume that Isabel and Piyumi have had people along the way that have genuinely got. It sounds like Rob Semple was a big person for Isabel, and these people are huge in your life. I've had that when I was a trainee.
Yes, absolutely. It is extremely important, especially for someone like me who's like totally new to the whole setup and the whole country. Dr. Paul Carroll from GSTT was like sort of a very big figure in my life. He was the one who guided me throughout all the steps, and then a lot of other people, Prof. Baldewig. So all these people, finding all these people and really connecting with them to in this professional way to get all these advices were really useful for me. to come to this stage after 4 years of coming to this country.
Does anyone know what the associate PI scheme is? I'm embarrassed to say I don't.
Yeah, so I don't know anyone who's actually done it. I think it's an NIHR funded scheme for clinicians who maybe haven't done research in the past, who don't have PhDs and so on, but are interested in getting into research, but particularly clinical research. And my understanding is, and please fact check me on this, is I think it's a way of linking up keen clinicians to existing NIHR portfolio studies. And essentially, getting people trained up through that sort of apprenticeship scheme. I don't know anything about its selection criteria or anything like that. And as I say, I don't know anyone who's done it. It sounds great, specifically if you're interested in doing clinical studies, clinical trials, that sort of thing. It sounds like a really good idea. But I can't speak to its success so far. Very much want to echo the thing about mentors. I wouldn't be where I am without mentors. Rob, as you say early on, Steve O'Reilly, very much so throughout my career, and more recently Sadaf Faruqi. They're all great. They will shape you in a slightly different way. And I always really enjoy hearing about how people have been shaped by their own mentors, and you can kind of see how it's when people, more senior colleagues, talk about the mentors they've had over the years, you can see how they too have been shaped by these experiences, and it's critical, just like in the clinical setting, I think. So I very much speak to lots of people, find your mentor. That's a really important piece of advice, I think.
Lovely, thank you.
There's a question about preparing for the endocrinology scenarios. I think you mean to get a specialty training number. I mean, as the training program director, there are a few stations. I mean, I've given it up now, but the first one is the most important thing actually is not the scenarios, it's your commitment to the specialty. So show that you've done something. Join the Society of Endocrinology or Diabetes UK, do a small audit, no matter how small and insignificant you think it is. If it's got the words diabetes and endocrinology, someone's going to think you're not a failed cardiologist or something. In terms of the scenarios, don't worry too much. I mean, the most important thing is we're not comparing apples with pears. We sometimes get people who've done years locums of diabetes and endocrinology. We know they're going to be able to give a good answer between the difference, say, of type 2 diabetes in clinic versus someone that's never done a diabetes and endocrine job. So it's how you think, and if the interview is fair, it will judge you on how much experience you've had, and the same with endocrinology. So there probably are some, past scenarios, but don't overthink that. It's much more about how you communicate, and so when you leave that room, you want the interviewers to think, I'd really like that person to come and join my team. That's your aim, rather than give the best answer about the importance of anti-islet cell antibodies for type 1 diabetes and C-peptide reserve. I don't know, Piyumi, have you been closer to it, or Isabel, or even Kanyada, in terms of getting trainee posts?
I think obviously there's quite a few ways of getting into specialty post training, both academic links like the ACF profile or the normal training pathway. And I think, learning to interview for the endocrinology registrar job, I think they're just trying to find someone who's safe and has the way of thinking in a logical way of how to investigate people presenting with endocrinology and diabetes. So I think similar to general medicine, just have that approach, I think would be my advice, having done it quite recently. Okay, so shall we move on to the next question then? What tips or advice would you give students on how to get involved in endocrinology?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. I mean, I guess, look, for example, if you want to if you've always wanted to do research into, the genetics and the mechanisms of insulin resistance, then what you do is you go and speak to someone like Isabel and say, how do I get on, how do I get stuck into the lab and do a BSc or do some wet lab research in your summer holidays or whatever. If you're a medical student that's not sure and just wants to, for example, get something on your CV and get a bit of experience, then I've taken quite a lot of students to the Society for Endocrinology. I just get them to have interesting cases. One thing you mustn't do, and one thing that's happening at the moment, which is really annoying me, is students are sitting in clinic, and then when you're getting hypoglycemic at the end of clinic, and it's like 11:30, you've got another hour to go, and a student says, I'm really sorry, Dr. Levy, do you mind if I leave? I think I'm going to have to go and have lunch. That person is never going to get support to do an extra thing, because if you can't stay to the end of clinic, you're not going to do the extra work. The people that I tend to look after are the ones that start a clinical session with you, seem genuinely interested, ask lots of really good questions, stay until the end of the session, and then if they say, look, is there anything I can do to get involved with endocrinology? I'll say, well, what about that case we saw earlier? Why don't you write that up as an abstract for the Society of Endocrinology? Then we get them a prize, and then they get it paid for. And then these things are a two-way thing. What I would advise you not to do is turn up and say, have you got any good projects I can do, expecting it to be spoon-fed. You need to give a little bit.
Lovely. And because we're so lucky to have consultants from different area in the country, there's a question about best area/hospital for endocrinology training from one of our attendees.
People bias. I mean, again, I would say look at the people. I would say look at what's actually realistic. So, there's no point in applying for a job that doesn't exist. It's always been the case in hospital medicine that you have to compromise either your specialty or your geography. And so if you're absolutely fixed to one part of the country, then you're reducing your options if there are no jobs coming up. So you have to do the mental jiu-jitsu yourself, whether you're willing to be flexible either in specialty or in geography. So the other thing is it all depends, what you want to do. If you want to be a diabetologist, go to an area that's really famous for diabetes. If you want to do academia, go to a place that's got a good academic. So I think I would probably look into, you really need to do some homework and talk to the trainees, because what sounds brilliant may be a terrible place to train and you get no exposure in the teaching hospital, whereas somewhere that sounds a bit less glamorous, you may find that you have loads of really good specialist experience and the trainees are all happy. So I think talk to the trainees that are currently in post would be the best thing.
Okay. And the next question is, if I could ask Dr. Vijay Vikrama, I have applied for endocrinology this round. However, no offers were given out yet. And I was just wondering what job out of training would you recommend? Or if you have any recommendations for any other jobs or waiting for a training number.
Yes, I think, even when I was at UCLH, I had, as I was just exiting UCLH, we had several people coming in as senior clinical fellows, or rather trust doctors for endocrine. So I think if you really want to do endocrine, then remaining in that sort of a job until you get a training number will be a good strategy. I've seen people doing that and becoming successful subsequently as well.
Lovely. And I think there's also another part of the question about research. So if I go to Dr. Wongdoran, what is the best pathway getting into research post IMT training?
Yeah, so I did cover this in my talk, so I'm sorry you missed that bit. I think essentially, as I mentioned, we are always on the lookout for bright, enthusiastic, committed people to come and join in with our research activities. So the more you go out and attend clinics and speak to people and find out what opportunities might be there, the more likely you are to find an opportunity that works for you. As Professor Levy very, very rightly said, you've got to be willing to put the work in and not expect opportunities just to land on your plate. You've got to go out and look for them. And the more you talk to people, the more you'll find out what locally might be an option. So sorts of things include either, doing a little bit of research in your spare time, whatever that means for you. And that may be, looking into some clinical records, or it may be some computational work if that's what you have some background in. Other options include looking for very specific posts that might be advertised for a one-year fellowship, where people are looking for clinicians with a degree of clinical experience to join their research study, but just for a year. And you know, recently within the IMS here in Cambridge, we've appointed a couple of people into those sorts of positions, including kind of post F2 level or post IMT level. So there are options, but they're kind of few and far between, and you just have to go out and look for them. And as I said repeatedly, speak to as many people as possible.
I tell my trainees when they ask about advice about a job, I say there's only 100% rule in terms of job applications, and that is if you don't apply for a job, you don't get it. So never ever count yourself out of anything, because you never know. Okay, everybody starts from somewhere, and there are some people that look like academics from the start, and I love people that are slightly late developers that develop a real interest in something. So never ever count yourself out of anything if you really want to do it, would be my advice.
Lovely. I think that was all the questions we have for this evening. And I think that was the perfect ending to the webinar, actually. So I want to thank all the panel very much for their time today and for sharing their experiences from academia, CISA, and also a career as a consultant. So thank you very much for everyone and for all their time. The certificate will be issued out shortly. If you could fill in the feedback form, that would be greatly appreciated. And the videos will be posted on the Society's website and also on YouTube. So thank you very much for everyone's time. I hope you have a lovely evening and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Good luck, everyone. Good luck.
Good luck. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.